Welcome once more to part 8 of this Zelda Timeline attempt. Now in the last video, the original Nintendo titles were finally placed in the timeline. And now it's time to move on to the game I truly believe created this series into what it is today. Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. Now when Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past was released, there was some serious doubt about what type of game it was going to be. The original title had been a top-down perspective, and was for the most part a huge dungeon crawl, with even outdoor areas being essentially a giant dungeon in and of itself. The second game had been more of a mix between Castlevania and a traditional Japanese RPG, with an overworld map with random encounters and a series of towns and dungeons you could travel between. A Link to the Past managed to take the best elements of both of these games, put them in a blender, hit puree, and got a masterpiece of video game history that still stands up to this day. The game went back to the dungeon design and top-down approach of the original title, while simultaneously adding non-hostile locations to interact with, NPCs, that did more than just sell you things or give you cryptic clues. This was also the first game to introduce a lasting Zelda concept of a secondary world to interact with that's been carried forward even into more recent titles in the series. The game starts with a legend from yore, telling of a great evil that poured forth from a gateway to the Sacred Realm, where the legendary Triforce was said to lay. Before the world was lost, a group of wise men were able to seal the world off from the Sacred Realm, but nearly all the Knights of Hyrule were lost in the final battle. The game starts an untold number of generations later, with a wizard capturing control of Hyrule, via magic of course, and using his dark powers of darkness on the wise men's descendants, who are all chicks by the way, because we can't have Link save a dude for once. This begins to lower the seal between Hyrule and the Dark World, which the Sacred Realm has now become. Once again, a new version of Link, this time the last descendants of the Knights of Hyrule, is called by destiny to save the world from Ganon, who has been sealed in the Dark World. So let's roll up our sleeves once again, put on our thinking caps, get some caffeine, get ready for another point-by-point analysis of a game's placement. Ah, screw that. It goes here. Now, I will say I could do what I did with Zelda 2 and place the war spoken of in the intro into the timeline and work through the timeline to place this game, but it's really unnecessary. This is because of one line at the ending of the game saying that the Master Sword sleeps again. Forever. Not until Ganon returns, not until it's needed again to fight some new big bad. Forever. As in, forever, forever. This means that this game is the last one, in its respective timeline, to have the Master Sword play a role. We can once again eliminate the adult timeline with what I'm now calling the adult timeline syndrome. In this case, the last game in the adult timeline to feature the Master Sword was Wind Waker. But in that game, the sword was resting on the bottom of the ocean. As we never see the ocean's level fall back down, we can rule this timeline out again. In addition to the normal death mountains in this game, and couldn't possibly be in the game if Wind Waker took place after Wind Waker and all that jazz. In the Young Link timeline, we can now see a very clear progression of the Master Sword, however. In Ocarina of Time, it was held in the Temple of Time. In Twilight Princess, it was now in the ruined Temple of Time. And in A Link to the Past, we can now see that the temple has been completely swept away, leaving only the magical sword in its pedestal to mark its passing. Because of this, this game will be color-coded black. There is really no other place that it could be placed in the timeline. Four Swords Adventures sees the return of Zant. Yes, Zant the Moron. It seems that as the seal on the Four Sword weakened, a series of problems began to plague Hyrule, until finally Link was summoned to look into the problem. When he arrives, a shadow version of himself appears, traps the Shrine Maidens, all chicks again of course, and eventually leads Link to pulling the Four Sword from its pedestal, causing Link to split into four versions of himself and freeing Zant. Fortunately, it eventually becomes apparent that this is not our true villain for the evening, but, like in Twilight Princess and Link to the Past, that Ganondorf is the true puppet master, and Zant is playing his patsy, and using shadow versions of Link to try to turn the people against him. Eventually, you square off against Ganondorf, and unsurprisingly, leave him sealed inside the Four Sword, after having dealt with Zant in a much more permanent fashion. When looking for placement for this game in the timeline, it really comes down to one thing, or I should say one person, Ganondorf. As he is in this game, we can say that it takes place after Ocarina of Time. And in another case of adult timeline syndrome, we can rule out the adult timeline as this Ganon doesn't fit anywhere in it. And old world Hyrulean landmarks in the game rule out New Hyrule as the setting for this game. Both A Link to the Past and in the original, he looks as he does at the end of Adventures, a giant pig. But in the original title, he's missing the trident, and in Twilight Princess, he appears as he does in Ocarina of Time. Fortunately, this game gives us some clues to help sort through all of this. First, the game serves as the origin point of the trident, when we see its former resting place shortly after it was removed by Ganon in the desert temple in this game. This puts the game, at the very least, before A Link to the Past. The trident is described in this game as being more than just a normal weapon, and in many ways is the opposite of the Master Sword itself, although the weapon does not appear in this title. The question is now, what caused Ganon to turn into what we see at the end of the game? The giant pig that we also see in the original title. To do this, we must try and figure out when this transformation occurred. The largest clue for this comes from the descriptions given to you when you are given permission by the Gerudo tribe to chase after Ganon. The Gerudo tribe in this game proves to be a valuable ally, and gives you some advice and warnings before sending you after Ganon. But you have to assume that if Ganon had some major character trait that would help you identify him, the conversation would go something like this. "Oh, you're after Ganon, the criminal. Oh, yes, he went that way. It's dangerous, and you'll find the way difficult, and be careful, he's quite dangerous, and, God, is there anything else you would need to know? Oh, yeah, he's a giant man-pig!" As this doesn't happen, indeed at one point he's called a man, not a monster or creature, it's not a huge leap in logic to assume that when Ganon passed through the village and went to the temple, he was still more or less a man. And the only thing of note that we know of happening to him between that point and his appearance at the end of the game is his gaining the trident, a weapon that holds some serious power in his own right. So it's not a huge stretch to assume that the trident was the cause for his transformation. If that's right, then this game would be placed after Ocarina of Time, and by extension Majora's Mask, but before the original title, as he still has the vestige of a pig in that game. Another piece of evidence for this is with the return of a character from Ocarina of Time, Kaepora Gaebora, the helpful owl who reprises his role of doling out tidbits of information, implying again that this game takes place around the same period as Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. So with the return of a character from Ocarina of Time, and what appears to be at least a continuation of the original story from Ocarina of Time for Ganon, this is where we'll place this title, coded red on the scale. While one could make a case for another placement, putting this title here gives us a natural extension of Ganon's story, as well as an explanation for his appearance in later titles. In fact, the placement here also begins to show a clearer picture of Ganon's journey, in somewhat the same way as the Master Swords, although it isn't nearly as complete. In Ocarina of Time, we see Ganon's first appearance, as leader of the Gerudo tribe. In this timeline, however, his plot to kill the king is revealed, even before it gets off the ground. It seems quite likely that the Gerudo tribe would turn on him at this point. After all, at best he was plotting to kill a foreign head of state they had friendly relations with, and at worst he was planning to kill his own king. The state of the Gerudo tribe in the Kingdom of Hyrule is never truly clear. But either way, he would likely have been viewed as the villain, and branded the criminal that he is called in Adventures. Then, in that game, having been shunned by his people and unwilling to give up the power He eventually hatches a new plot, culminating as his breaking one of his people's greatest laws, and steals the trident, turning it into the giant pig that he is known for, although he is stopped by Link, who is perhaps the same Link from Ocarina of Time, recently returned from his journey in Majora's Mask, and sealed in the Four Sword. However, if Vaati was eventually able to weaken his prison, Ganon certainly would be able to, and when he is finally free, there is no reincarnation of Link to save the day, and he manages to sweep through Hyrule until he is stopped just short of his goal when a new Link does arrive. In Zelda 2, Link never dies, and therefore his followers were unable to resurrect him, but there is no real time limit given on when the ritual for his return needs to happen, and it's quite possible that his followers simply waited for Link to die or grow too old to defend himself, and took his blood then, using it to resurrect their Dark Lord. At this point, however, the location for the trident would almost certainly have been either lost, as Ganon doesn't seem to have it with him upon his death, or under lock and key, if the Hyruleans found it after Ganon's defeat. Regardless, the sudden killing or grave robbing of Hyrule's greatest hero is unlikely to have gone unnoticed. It's likely that Ganon would have been quickly recaptured before being able to restore himself to full power, leading to the events seen in the flashback in Twilight Princess, when he is viewed as simply too dangerous to be allowed to live, and his failed execution eventually leading to the events in Twilight Princess. At the end of this game is where the mystery still lays, as Ganon is killed at the end after the Triforce abandons him. However, even though how he crawls back from the grave this time is unknown, when he does return to the land of the living, he gains control of a band of thieves, as told in A Link to the Past, and gains entrance to the Golden Land. There he creates his own world. Twisting it to suit his desires, he transforms himself into the form in which he nearly gained total victory, and all those generations ago, and in the center of this realm is a recreation of the site of perhaps his greatest triumph. The pyramid where he turned against his people and seized power for himself, complete with its own version of the trident. Sealed in this realm by the war spoken of in the intro to A Link to the Past, he eventually manages to kick off the event shown in A Link to the Past, and is finally defeated once more, this time by a descendant of those who held him back in the final moments of the war that left him sealed away. With only a few games left to go, we'll return to the Game Boy in the next installment as Link travels to faraway places.